thousands of commercial flights cross the North Pole every year, passengers barely notice it. They're eating airline food, watching movies, trying to sleep, completely unaware that they're flying over one of the most remote places on Earth. But here's the strange part. Almost no commercial flight flies over the South Pole. Not because airplanes can't get there, not because Antarctica is off limits, and not even because it's cold. In fact, the real reason has more to do with economics than engineering. But before we get there, we need to talk about the one thing that makes Antarctica uniquely difficult for aviation: distance. To understand why airlines avoid the South Pole, we first need to understand why airlines love the North Pole. Most people think airplanes fly in straight lines. They don't. At least not the straight lines you see on a flat map. Because Earth is a sphere, the shortest route between two cities is often something called a Great Circle Route. That's why flights between places like New York and Hong Kong, Dubai and Los Angeles, or New Delhi and San Francisco often curve dramatically northward. On a globe, that's actually the shortest path. The North Pole isn't a detour. For many long-haul routes, it's the shortcut. So, naturally, you might assume airlines could do the same thing in the Southern Hemisphere. And technically, they could. But Antarctica introduces a problem that the Arctic doesn't. A problem so significant that it changes how airlines plan entire routes.
That problem is called ETOPS. And despite the complicated name, the idea is surprisingly simple. Imagine you're cruising over the middle of nowhere and one of your engines fails. Modern airliners can safely continue flying on a single engine, but regulators still want to know one thing: how quickly can you reach an airport? That's what ETOPS measures. It determines how far a twin-engine aircraft is allowed to fly from a suitable diversion airport. Decades ago, aircraft had to stay within 60 minutes of one. Today, modern jets are so reliable that aircraft like the Boeing 787 and Airbus A350 can operate several hours away from the nearest airport. That's why crossing oceans has become routine. But Antarctica is different. The South Pole sits roughly 2,500 miles from the nearest major diversion airport. Think about that for a second. If something goes wrong, there isn't another city nearby. There isn't another runway nearby. There isn't much of anything nearby. And that's where the entire idea starts to fall apart. Because even some of the world's most capable airliners begin running into limits down there. But distance isn't Antarctica's only problem. The environment itself creates challenges that airlines have to prepare for long before the plane ever leaves the ground. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, hit the like button. It's a small thing, but it helps this video reach people who love aviation, geography, and weird questions like this. And considering we're talking about flying over Antarctica, I'd say we've already entered weird question territory.
Antarctica isn't just cold, it's aggressively cold. Winter temperatures in the interior can plunge below -50 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, things stop behaving normally, including airplanes. That's why aviation authorities introduced special regulations for polar operations. Flights operating near the poles require additional planning, specialized crew training, emergency procedures, and equipment designed for extreme conditions. Pilots have to monitor fuel temperature carefully because jet fuel can eventually begin approaching its freezing point. Navigation also becomes more complicated because magnetic compasses become less reliable near the poles. Even emergency planning changes. Airlines need approved diversion airports and evacuation plans in case a flight is forced to land somewhere unexpectedly. Now here's what's interesting. None of these requirements actually stop airlines from flying over a pole. After all, airlines do all of this over the Arctic every day, which means Antarctica still has another problem
that most people never think about.
Most people picture Antarctica as a giant frozen sheet of ice at sea level. It's not. The continent sits surprisingly high. Its average elevation is roughly 7,500 feet above sea level. Some areas are much higher. Normally, if an aircraft experiences a sudden loss of cabin pressure, pilots descend rapidly to an altitude where passengers can safely breathe. It's one of aviation's standard emergency procedures. But over Antarctica, that emergency descent becomes far more complicated. The terrain below limits how low you can safely go, which means crews may need to remain at higher altitudes longer than they would elsewhere. It's another layer of complexity, another problem to plan around, another reason airlines tend to look at Antarctica and simply decide, maybe let's fly somewhere else. And yet, even if all the technical challenges disappeared tomorrow, airlines still probably wouldn't rush to start South Pole routes, because the biggest reason isn't technical at all.
The real reason is demand, or more accurately, the lack of it. About 90% of the world's population lives in the northern hemisphere. Most major cities are there. Most business travel happens there. Most long-haul international routes happen there, which means airlines naturally build networks around northern routes. That's why crossing the Arctic makes economic sense. Millions of passengers need those flights. The southern hemisphere simply doesn't have the same concentration of cities. And actually, this makes me curious. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. One of the coolest things about making videos like this is realizing that people from completely different parts of the world can all end up watching the same strange aviation story at the same time. All right, back to Antarctica. There are very few city pairs that genuinely benefit from flying over Antarctica. The route most people point to is Perth, Australia to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And while a polar route might make geographical sense, there just aren't enough people trying to make that trip. Airlines don't build routes because they're interesting. They build routes because people buy tickets. And unfortunately for Antarctica, penguins aren't booking business class. And if you're the kind of person who enjoys learning why airlines, countries, and entire industries make these decisions, consider subscribing. These are exactly the kinds of questions we explore here. The North Pole succeeds because civilization surrounds it. North America, Europe, Asia. There are airports in Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Norway, and Russia. If something goes wrong, there are options. Real runways, real emergency services, real infrastructure. Antarctica has almost none of that. There are research stations, there are seasonal facilities, but there isn't an aviation network capable of supporting routine commercial traffic. The Arctic is remote. Antarctica is isolated. And in aviation, those are very different things. History also serves as a reminder of how unforgiving Antarctica can be. In 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 departed on a sightseeing trip over Antarctica. It never returned. The aircraft crashed into Mount Erebus during whiteout conditions, killing all 257 people on board. The disaster revealed just how deceptive Antarctica can be. The landscape often appears flat when it isn't. The light can erase depth perception. The environment provides almost no visual references. Even experienced crews can find themselves operating in conditions like nowhere else on Earth. The accident became one of the most significant tragedies in Antarctic aviation history, and it reinforced a lesson airlines already understood. This is not a place where mistakes are easily forgiven. And honestly, this is exactly the kind of aviation story most people never hear about. So, if you've got a friend who's obsessed with airplanes, travel, geography, or those random facts that somehow always come up in conversations, send this video to them. There's a pretty good chance they'll end up going down the same rabbit hole you just did.
So why do airplanes fly over the North Pole, but not the South Pole? It's not because Antarctica is forbidden. It's not because aircraft can't physically do it, and it's not because pilots are afraid of the cold. It's because Antarctica combines every challenge airlines try to avoid: extreme distance, limited diversion airports, harsh weather, complex emergency planning, difficult terrain, and most importantly, very little passenger demand. The Arctic sits between some of the busiest cities on Earth. Antarctica sits between almost none, which is why every day hundreds of flights cross the top of the world, while the bottom remains one of the last places commercial aviation simply doesn't need to go. And honestly, that's part of what makes it fascinating. Some places remain difficult to reach, not because we lack the technology, but because we finally have enough wisdom not to force the issue. If you enjoyed this video and want more deep dives into aviation, geography, infrastructure, and the strange systems that quietly shape our world, make sure you're subscribed. We make videos like this regularly, and if this topic grabbed your attention, there's a good chance you'll enjoy the next one too. And speaking of next, there's a playlist on your screen right now filled with videos that uncover fascinating things most people never stop to think about. Go ahead and click it. I have a feeling the next video is exactly your kind of rabbit hole. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.